So, the challenge of introducing John is thinking about what exactly could you say that could fully capture John Spertus and what his contribution is. This is his cheesecake photo that I found. Yeah, thanks. His phone's in his hand too. I don't want to say anything, and I know that this is inappropriate, and I will ask no one to record this. But this is John's come hither look. He told me there was a time in his life when it never failed. I don't know if that's true, but I'm kind of attracted to him right now. I can feel the vibe. There's a serious part of this introduction because I did want to let John give his talk. So, John, remember when I first met you? Do you know when I first met you?
Yeah.
Do you? Yeah. You were with Jennifer Martin and you and Nathan walking out of a meeting?
I remember me asking you a question on whether you accounted for the transfers in on one of your early CCP abstracts at an oral presentation.
You were that person? I've been carrying that around with me the rest of the I cannot believe you did that. Yeah. But I remember when I first met John, and there is a certain spark about John, a brilliance really, creativity, that is extraordinarily rare. And the very best people who ask questions and try to find answers have an intense curiosity about life and a curiosity about the field that they're in. And they combine that with an ability to make connections, to think about things deeply, to have things sort of strike them. And then when they say them to you, they strike you as being remarkably fresh. They provide a perspective in a way that you've never quite heard before or thought of before. And John, from the very moment I met him, I could see, wow, I've got to be around this guy. I've got to tap into some of that creativity, and I want to get to know him because I could feel that sort of special part of him that looked at the world in different ways. What I didn't know at that time was that there are a lot of people who try to also come up with new insights, but there are far fewer who will combine that with an intense drive to see its application for the benefit of people in the world. And the other thing about John, as I got to know him, was that he wanted to combine the ideas that he was having. And John was always about a decade ahead of everyone else in the field. But he wanted to see, with great impatience, the application of those ideas into practice for benefit. And if you know John, you know that his history is encountering a lot of resistance. And it's actually hard to tell because John is, he's such an upbeat individual that the kind of resistance that he's encountered hasn't really taken a toll like it would on a lot of us. But because John is so far ahead, I mean, to be thinking about patient-reported outcome measures, certainly there was the SF-36, there were other people around, but to be thinking about it in a disease-specific way when you're a fellow, and to actually be developing it in very novel and yet rigorous ways, and positioning it to become a standard in the field. And it's not actually about the paper, and it's not about the idea of patient-reported outcome measures, but it's the notion of giving voice to the patient, to paying attention to what actually our patients experience, and then taking that into a rigorous framework so that it wasn't going to be just qualitative and anecdotal. And there's nothing wrong with good qualitative work, but you weren't going to be able to scale that into practice and into research in a way that would have fundamental shifts in the way in which it would occur. So John, whether it was about that, whether it was about registries with longitudinal follow-up that was going to incorporate interviewing patients, whether it was going to be about the idea of actually, among the many things, starting a business, because he saw that the idea of bringing decision support and channeling the notion of heterogeneity in the risk models to the bedside was going to require capital. It was going to require a sustainable model. And he tried this. He's actually a serial entrepreneur. When he would see an idea that should have traction, the epimetrics that he did with Stan, I think was way before its time, the idea of trying to codify the way in which we could use some of these tools and instruments. is remarkable and takes courage, and he has encountered resistance. And yet at the end of the day, I think he's seen his influence catalyze change in the healthcare system. But that's not enough to know about John, of course, because the other thing to know about him is that he is among the most generous individuals I've ever met. As a collaborator, John, I can't ever remember a time when he's put himself first. I can't ever remember a time when he's held back sharing an idea or extending a hand or providing some sort of support or mentorship to someone who needed it. I don't think there's one person in the entire world who can tell a story about John that would reflect any sense of selfishness or anything that was going to be about him. And that was also both a source of inspiration for me, because to be working with someone like that is extraordinarily remarkable. And to see someone so gifted and someone who at times was encountering resistance, being willing not to become negative about that, but to be positive and to help everyone else up was an amazing thing. I do want to say one thing about John's business, because I want to say I think this idea of channeling the risk models and bringing them to the bedside so individual choices can be made that are in the best interest of the patients, and the one that he's done the most has been in the cath lab, which has been shown to save money and improve outcomes, is something that is actually a pretty remarkable idea. And I think it's hard for John to talk about it because there's this COI concern about him promoting work that is related to his company. But I can tell you, looking at from outside, I've got no interest. I don't know, that bastard didn't give me any. But but besides that, I don't know why. I was with him when he thought of it. But anyway, I digress. But the company is extraordinary, and I think that it speaks to the thinking about new models, not being stuck in the models of just publishing the paper, but the model of seeing it to its end. So I've got a few slides to show, but let me just say, in the end, there's this sort of quote that I heard a long time ago, that like, no one's a hero to their butler. The sense of that is the closer you get to someone, the more ordinary they become in a way, because you understand that they're just like everyone else. They've got strengths and weaknesses, and people live in. But I would tell you that as someone who's been very close to John and watched him and his teams and everything, the closer you look at John, the better he looks. I don't mean physically. That ship has sailed. But I'm trying to make a really sensitive point here. I really believe this. I mean, I've seen John transacting and interacting and in every different, not every situation, but in many situations. I'm going way down the wrong track here, but I just want to just tell me to stop. And I was trying to express the point that some people from afar can look good. The really great people look good when you can actually see them do the work, and I think everyone here has almost experienced this. So to end this, and then just show you a few slides that I had, I wanted to just say that sometimes you think like the true greats don't exist anymore. They're kind of in our mind, the people who were the greats who led cardiology for long periods of time. I really consider John a great. He's great in his creativity, he's great in his generosity, he's great in his productivity, and I think he's great in his influence on behalf of patients all around the world. And I think he is one of those people that is truly special in that way and so deserving of this recognition. And I'm proud to be a friend, and I felt honored to watch your career over time and see the influence that you've had. So. Citations, but I just want to show you on some of the tangible things that people do care about. And 2005 is not over, but this is his citations per year over time. I wanted to show you his H index, which is the number of papers with over that many citations, is at 86, which is extraordinary. And I just wanted to toggle through some of his top papers and show you the total number of citations associated with them. We know many of them have been influenced beyond citations, and citations don't just capture them. But he's had a lot of brave tints over the years. And I had How did that get in there?
All I know is somebody's not going to have a job when they get back to San Francisco.
I'm just going to linger on this slide. I just think it's the most remarkable picture.
Look, that was very cool in the 70s.
John and his precious family. I tell you, he's a remarkable father and husband, and it's not just what he does with his work, it's amazing. And typical John, you'll see this in a second. With the China team. Brahmaji wearing a tie. This was one of the early trips. His team, Kansas City, with the HOS team. I guess all the state HOS, right? With Ben McAllister. I don't know how they got the flat John. That was really. There he is. Okay, John's word.
It's a very touching tribute, Harlan. I've known Harlan for a long time.
I think I took the microphone.
What? Oh, thank you. And you want to sit with everyone else? Believe me, the slides are worth it. You'd think after 20 plus years of giving talks, I would have figured out how to actually run the projector. First of all, what a privilege. I mean, thank you all so much for coming, for staying to the AHA. I know it was a very exciting meeting, but to spend yet another night away from your family and to be here is remarkable to me. And, you know, it is an amazing field that we have in outcomes research. I mean, there is a very visceral sense of being family, friends, and colleagues, and having a sense of a real mission to move forward and make a huge impact on healthcare. And I did want to talk a little bit about how I conceptualize the field. Since I've now gotten the Lifetime Achievement Award, I guess my life is over, and I thought I should share with you some of my learnings over time. And, you know, I thought it would be worth sort of reflecting on sort of a metaphor for what the field is like. And might as well start with the Kansas City. This is an amazing story, right? I mean, the Royals did not have any really star players. I mean, they just announced all day today, all the rewards that, for the most valuable player, and the Roberto Clemente Award, and this award and that award. I mean, who knew? Even the Manager of the Year award, none of them were won by Royals. I mean, the Royals were a team of individuals who were so much greater than the sum of their parts. They really worked together, they supported each other, they went through lots of trials and tribulations. I've been in Kansas City for 20 years, and I think the first 12 of them, half of those years, they had more than 100 losses in a year. I mean, it has been a team that has been just awful. And they worked hard, they persevered, and ultimately they celebrated the small victories that they had. Looks like it's the World Series. Actually, this was their, I think the first time they drove 500 3 years ago or 4 years ago. So it's not, so remarkable, but by a team working together, supporting each other, this year they won the World Series. And, we in, outcomes research are a bunch of individuals who collectively can work so much better together to make a huge impact on healthcare in the U.S. and throughout the world. It's a nice sort of metaphor for what we do. And so, in the next 2.5 hours, I would like to touch on 3 main sort of points. The first is to really challenge us to think about what is a satisfying career, what justifies our work, and to have you feel as outcomes researchers that your work is not valued by the number of publications you have or the number of citations, but on the impact it ultimately has on the patients that we're trying to serve. I'd like to touch on challenging us all, and I've been very lucky. I've been able to think about sort of what is the problem and what are creative strategies to overcome that problem. And we often have to think of novel approaches. And I want to end with a sense that this traditional metric that so many of the universities focus on, how many RL1 grants you get, how much money you're bringing into the institution, how you're going to run on the NIH treadmill, is not the way that we have to think about our field, that we have other opportunities to fund and support the work that we do. And for many of you who are much younger, I want to sort of set the seed for you to think about these other strategies. So, this is a standard. Why do we do outcomes research? I mean, it's really about trying to understand what works in medicine. And it is trying to figure out in what patients does it work, and how do we deliver that care to maximize the value, because there is such variation in care that we have to figure out what's that variation attributable to, and if we want to make a difference, how are we going to get that under control and figure out what novel strategies can we pursue to improve the care that we deliver. And then, getting that insight is not enough. You have to think about how are you going to change the healthcare system for the better. And believe me, our healthcare system needs help. These are, again, I hate to show you standard slides, but you can just see the rapidly escalating percentage of our GDP. When I got into this field and inspired, I was reading work by John Eisenberg in 1985 saying, oh my goodness, we're going to hit 11%, 12% of GDP. I mean, we are well approaching 20% now, 1 out of every $5 being spent. And when you break it down to the individual family, the average family is projected in 2011 to spend $20,000 a year in healthcare. Now, obviously, some spend a lot less, some spend a lot more. This is the average, but it's a huge burden on families in the U.S. to be able to afford it. And you can see at the very top, you don't have to read the slides to know that we are the far outlier in how much percent of GDP we're spending. And since we have the largest GDP in the world, that is a lot of money. I don't need David Cohen to tell me about economics. That's a lot of money. And yet, when you look at the outcomes that we get, this is the projected life expectancy, and it's led by Japan. We are over here. I mean, thank God for the Eastern Bloc of, Latvia and Slovenia and Belarus, because they're the only people to the right. We're behind Chile. I mean, this is a problem. And, our healthcare system is broken. I mean, we are bombarded, whether it's the Institute of Medicine giving us report after report about how dysfunctional the healthcare system is, whether it's the lay press. People are wanting and demanding value in healthcare, and you in the outcomes field have the opportunity to help lead us forward. And the outcome value equation is actually an incredibly simple one, right? I mean, it's the patient's experience, the outcomes we deliver for them over the cost. And as I've gotten deeper into trying to understand this, I also realized that we have an enormous challenge in U.S. healthcare around how to deliver high-value care in a very consistent fashion. Some of you who are sort of been following some of our more recent work, this is one of my favorite slides. I mean, this is a slide that came from a prospective AHA-funded 9-center registry trying to support precision medicine, trying to implement risk models in clinical care. And we looked at how well do doctors naturally tend to tailor treatment to risk. Because as patients' risk of bleeding goes up, you should be more aggressive in using bleeding mitigation strategies. And we had the luxury of a 9-center study where there were 137 interventions. And these were great centers. I mean, this is Mayo Clinic and WashU and Yale and Baylor and Kaiser and really good centers. And they treated 7,500 patients in this study. And if you were thinking that we were delivering high-value healthcare, you would expect that when patients were at low risk for bleeding, we might not need to spend money on expensive sheaths for radial approaches, or we might not need to use bivalve units compared to heparin. But as that risk of bleeding goes up, you should start looking at least one, if not two or more bleeding avoidance strategies. And so this is what the ideal physician behavior would look like, that they would at least use one bleeding avoidance strategies as the risk of bleeding goes up. And this is the actual performance of these 137 interventions. And just to give you some context, I mean, these centers are really good centers. I'm not trying to insult the centers. These are the centers I would send my mom to if she needed angioplasty, right? And yet, their pattern does not look like this. It looks like this. I mean, this should be horrifying to those of you in the audience. I mean, first of all, there are some doctors who are always using bleeding avoidance strategies. Okay, they're really concerned about safety, whatever. There are doctors who never use any bleeding avoidance strategy. No radial, no closure device, no bivalve routing, regardless of bleeding risk. And those who are discriminating, they tend to use much more bleeding avoidance strategies in the low-risk patients where it does not benefit, and much less in the high-risk patient where it does benefit. Henry Tate's not in the audience. This is Henry Tate's curve. I just want to make it very clear that he was in this study, and he's the one interventionist who did it right. Everybody else was just off base. And if you want to make this very personal, I mean, imagine my mom needs to get angioplasty. I send her one of these 9 centers. Who's going to do her angioplasty is whoever's in the lab that day, right? It's a random event. And so my mom has a 10% risk of bleeding, the highest risk of bleeding. I want her to get not 1 but 2 bleeding avoidance strategies. Her chance of getting any bleeding avoidance strategy is between 1 and 100%. I mean, this should be very upsetting to those of you, and it is the kind of thing that I see, and it makes me really feel like this is a problem that needs to be changed. We have got to be committed to changing the healthcare system because we are clearly missing the target of high reliability healthcare. And changing it is our responsibility as clinicians, as academicians, as leaders, as advocates for our patients. This is what we need to be doing. And believe me, if we don't want to do it, we say, oh, that's for somebody else. And it is our community, the outcomes research community, that should do this. Believe me, there are other people who will help us figure this out. So if we do not choose to lead, this is who will lead. This is a graph that shows the growth in doctors in dark red here, and in light pink, the growth of administrators over the last 40 years. If we clinicians do not want to lead and figure out how we should allocate care in a highly valuable, cost-effective manner, I can assure you that all those people in pink are happy to tell us how to do our job. And so it requires leadership, and it requires a passion. And believe me, I know that changing healthcare is a long road. And, you know, as sort of folks like Harlan and I and, you know, Fred and others start, you know, moving off into pastures, not that we're kind of pushing out there, it is the opportunity and challenge for all of you to pick up this mantle and continue to carry us further along this path. And, when you want to make an advance, when you want to tackle a problem, it requires thinking creatively about this. And it is something that I feel strongly that the more inventive and creative you can be, and the more you can think outside the box, the better it is. When I grew up, my mom had this poster up on the wall, and it was John F. Kennedy, who was in, I think, Belfast, quoting George Bernard Shaw, where he said, "You see things and you say why, but I dream things that never were, and I say why not." And to me, this is how we need to approach the problems in healthcare, is think creatively. And to know that it is our innate curiosity and desire to understand how we can do better all the time that will drive us. Albert Einstein said, the important thing is not to stop questioning. Curiosity has its own reason for existing. One can help not be in awe when he contemplates the mysteries of eternity of life or the marvelous structure of reality, but it is enough if one tries merely to comprehend a little bit of this mystery every day. And this kind of questioning is something that I sort of innately have. Maybe it's my mom's fault for putting the poster on my wall, but the truth is that it dates back to when I was in medical school. And I went to UCSF. And those of you who are at UCSF for medical school know that the last month of UCSF medical school, they basically have all the students sit in an auditorium and they march all of the luminaries in the college to say, what is the future of my field? And the cardiologist who came was Mel Chapman. And Mel Chapman said, here's the future of cardiology. This study came out last week, and or 2 months ago, and it was the Timmy 2B trial. And it makes you feel old when they're on Timmy 79 or something like that. But, and they were still doing letters, right? A, B, C, D. Anyway, this is 2B. And what it was thrombolytic therapy had come out. We were giving streptokinase to patients with acute myocardial infarction. And they said, does doing angioplasty after reperfusion therapy confer any benefit? And what the study showed was that there was no difference in survival, there was no difference in ejection fraction, there's no difference in exercise time out to 42 days. And Mel Chapman says, well, I just want to tell you that we've been doing this thing called angioplasty, that's going to go away. It doesn't confer any value, we don't need it, it's over. And that was his sort of thing. So I'm a medical student, of course that's what's going to happen. So what happens? So I go up to Seattle where I did residency, and my first rotation, I mean literally like, July 1, I'm rotating at Providence Medical Center, which is now it's Swedish Hospital Hill or something like that. It's been bought and rebought again. But Providence was a private hospital that the students, the residents rotated through at University of Washington. I was on night float, so from 7 to 7, I would take care. And literally, like on the second or third day, this 45-year-old African American woman comes in with an inferior stemming. And we, give her thrombolytic therapy. She got streptokinase, and it worked beautifully. Her chest pain went away. Her EKG normalizes. She had the little runs of non-sustained ventricular tachycardia suggesting successful reperfusion. It was a beautiful story. And so I rotate off, and I'm really proud. I gave lytics, and God, it was so exciting. And so I really felt like it's April like that. And I come back the next night at 7 o'clock, and she had an angiogram. I'm like, wait, why did she have an angiogram? And they wrote that they were going to schedule her for a PCI. Now, I'm not known for being a wallflower. So the private cardiologist, they round about 9 o'clock, and my shift ended at 7. But I went out and I printed out the Timmy 2B article, and I hung out for the cardiologist to come by and to, sort of ask him, had he read New England Journal of Medicine? I mean, why in light of her evidence were you managing this patient this way? And what he said to me was really interesting. He said, my patients feel better with an open artery. I mean, it was an interesting point. Like, I was ready to be all high and mighty, and maybe he's right, you know? And in fact, you know, if you look at, this is a subsequent study looking at, you know, Gusto, a much larger study of different thrombolytic therapy regimens, and they report the results, and sure enough, accelerated TPA leads to a highly statistically significant reduction in mortality. We thought about, well, what happens to the patients who are above the ground as opposed to below the ground, and how do we understand how they're doing? And it is hard to hear the patient's voice sometimes. And, you know, what I sort of took on as my fellowship project was a desire to measure the patient's symptoms, function, and quality of life. And this is what launched my career. This is my first fellowship project, was creating the Seattle Angina Questionnaire. And not being one well-grounded in reality. You know, I had read this very inspiring article, the Shattuck Lecture by Paul Elwood, and this was in 1988, but it, you know, it was still being talked about when I was in 1990, when I was doing my residency, and or 1989 when I was doing my residency, and what he talked about in this lecture was a vision where, you know, we currently have uninformed patients, and that needs to change. And we have skeptical payers, and that is a problem for us in delivering healthcare. And what we need is a technology of patient experience that can be harnessed. I mean, first of all, these first two problems, they're no different than they are today. And yet, you know, we've still yet to build a technology of patient experience. McCory set up 4 questions that tried to figure out, what can I expect? What will happen to people like me? How will the outcomes I care about differ if I'm treated one way versus another? And that was the intent. And, you know, when he wrote this article way back then, he said we need to focus not only on survival, but on quality of life. And so I had built the SAC. I mean, I had built the Seattle Angina Questionnaire, and I thought it would be nothing to sort of build this vision because it just seemed so simple, right? So, you know, the vision is, you know, we have and can support shared medical decision making for our patients. That, and now, you know, Karen Humphreys is here. She's going to do what I've been trying to do for my entire career and failed. But it's a process where we have a concept of physicians explaining alternatives like angioplasty or medical therapy for coronary disease. And the doctors and patients talk such that the patient can explain to the doctor can explain to the patient what is their disease and what treatment options exist. The patient can talk about their preferences, and together they can figure out what's the right treatment for this particular patient, and then they can have an initial decision, and they can revisit the decision over time. The problem with this model is that patient preferences are often about their symptoms, function, and quality of life. They want to know, am I going to feel better with this treatment or that treatment? And the doctors have no idea how patients are going to do with one treatment or another in terms of the outcomes that the patients most care about. And so if you imagine a typical patient, my vision, this is literally cut from the very first grant I wrote when I got to Kansas City, was imagining a 72-year-old woman with new onset angina several times a week who gets CAP and has 2-vessel coronary disease, normally or slightly depressed EF, and she's diabetic and depressed. How this woman would be treated if she sees a preventive cardiologist, an interventional cardiologist, or a cardiothoracic surgeon is completely different. And you can imagine who would pick what. And, you know, that is not the way I thought healthcare ought to be. What we ought to be doing is showing this woman, what is your survival at a year with these alternative treatments? How are they going to impact your angina and the likelihood of having no angina a year later? And what are the upfront risks you have to take to get those angina benefits? This was sort of the vision. Bill Jones is in the audience. He's been with me for 16, 17 years. I started this before he joined, but again, trying to help build and sort of do this. So my very first grant application was the AHA Outcome Center grants that they had back in 1995, I think, a long time ago. And it was for $500,000, which I thought was an enormous amount of money for 3 years. And I propose literally collecting all the patients with an acute coronary syndrome at 2 hospitals, following them for 1-year quality of life data, building risk models, programming a Palm Pilot application with this risk model to do that very thing. And they actually rejected the grant. They said it was too ambitious. So, you know, we, oh, I guess, yeah, exactly. This is what we propose to build. We're going to build this risk model based on SAC scores, the outcomes of angioplasty, CABG, or bypass surgery, build a Palm Pilot application, pilot it, and write an R01. And of course, it got rejected. And so what we've done, and you know, we're dogged about this, we ended up with an R01 for just a 2-center registry. We got an industry grant to study the outcomes of quality of life outcomes after angioplasty. We got a Doris Duke Innovation and Clinical Research Award to build the Palm Pilot application, which by that time was a web-based application. We got industry funding for a 19-center post-MI registry. We got an NIH SCORE grant to fund a 24-center post-MI registry. Many of you participated in all of these. We did a testing of this sort of delivering risk models at the point of care through NIH and AHA funding. We got a PCORI grant to support sharing patient-level data and engaging patients in shared medical decision-making. And we are still working on building the right models to implement to get our goal. And I think Karen's going to be the first one to have that data and build it up in Canada. But it is a long path in order to realize your vision. And we are still striving to get to this goal where we empower patients to decide on the therapy most aligned with their goals and values. So we need to figure out, how do you fund something like this? And I want to end with thinking about, how do you support, and how are you going to go home and think about how you're going to support the research you're going to need to do in order to change the world? And it is not going to be through the traditional NIH, R01 treadmill, I think. I mean, if you look at NIH spending, we are spending 5.6% of our healthcare budget on research, but only 0.1% on health services research. And you know, whenever you have sort of some new idea and you want to bring something to the NIH and say, I have this novel idea, I can tell you, we never got the SAC funded, the KCCQ funded, any of the ideas we had, we almost never got funded because the reviewers are not going to think as creatively as you're thinking when you're trying to solve problems in your own healthcare system. And what are they going to say on every innovative grant that you submit? I mean, they're going to come up with all kinds of microscopic flaws that render it difficult to do. And so, what I'd like to do is test. I don't know if anybody's ever seen this video, but
already late.
Somebody will come.
Do you have a phone?
No. Sorry. Somebody! Hello! There are 2 people stuck on an escalator and we need help. Now, would somebody please do something? I don't believe this. You gotta be kidding me.
I'm gonna cry.
Well, not enough left to do, is it?
Hello? Hey, don't worry about it. I'll fix it in a second.
All right. That's more like it. He says he can fix it.
Walking down the sidewalk, kicking my feet as I'm moving to the music. Step to the beat, I walk until they kick in from my friends, and I step from the side with my guitar in my hand. The windows became alive, the sound was there, and I kicked it up a notch.
So, So, we get on this pattern of like, there's only one way to solve problems. There's only one way to fund our research. There's only one way to move things forward and make changes. And that's clearly not the case. And we have to think about other strategies. And, I wrote this editor's perspective earlier this year about starting to think about entrepreneurship as a vehicle of trying to affect and support the change that we think needs to happen. And, it sort of reflects this vision that we sort of naively think when we start on our research career and trying to solve a problem, is that you're a researcher and you're trying to climb the mountain of healthcare improvement. And you want to get to the other side where it's much easier going down than up. And so this is sort of the path, and I'm going to just personalize this because, it's all about me anyway. And so this is my journey, about how do you think about it. So, you develop a novel idea, and the idea was to bring risk models to the bedside, to actually leverage the heterogeneity of treatment data from clinical trials or observational registries, and create tools that can be used to improve care. And so we created an intervention, and we said, well, gee, we will replace the informed consent documents with personalized consents based on each individual patient, so we could understand before we even treat a patient what are their projected outcomes and how can we tailor our treatment to their risk to improve the value of healthcare we provide. And then we said, well, we'll pilot the intervention. So we piloted it at the Mid-America Heart Institute, and we took what was a risk treatment paradox, that's the graph on the left, showing that we're using much more bivalve in low-risk patients than high-risk patients. We reversed it, and now we use more bivalve in low-risk than high-risk patients. Dropped our bleeding rate by 40%. It was a good thing. And I said, okay, well now we're ready for the big grant. So we got funding from the NIH and the American Heart Association to do a 9-center study implementing this concept. And, lo and behold, we were able to prove the benefit of the intervention because we saw a marked reduction in bleeding among the patients who, when the doctors had the risk of the patients. What you're seeing here is the projected risk of bleeding, the observed rate of bleeding. This is before the doctors knew the risk of the patient. This is afterwards. There's a lot less bleeding in the high-risk patients because the doctors could tailor their treatment to the risk of the patient. Very good thing. And then you say, okay, well now we can just sit back and we can watch everybody demand our tool, start implementing it, we'll throw it up on the web, and everybody will do it, and bleeding will be a non-existent issue. And angioplasty more, and this will just be great. And when the sort of clouds pass, you realize how much harder it is to change healthcare than you think would possibly be possible. So what as a researcher are you going to do with this, right? I mean, what are the next steps? You've got something that you've developed, you're passionate about, it clearly is the right thing, it clearly improves outcomes, it saves the hospital money, it's a great idea. What do? Do you end up sort of writing articles describing the potential of personalized medicine and hope others just adopt the concept? Are you going to write a grant to continue the intervention? I mean, how do you even continue the intervention at the sites that already benefited from it? You change their process of informed consent, you yank it away from them and say, wait, my grant hasn't been funded to keep it going and see if we can sustain this impact? Are you going to write another grant to say, well, gee, I didn't quite eliminate all the variability. I have new ideas about how I can get the doctors to pay attention to the risk models so you try a more successful implementation? Are you going to just post models and tools on the web and hope that others adopt them so that they can get the same benefits than the intervention sites and they will somehow know how to use those models better than the original sites you tried? I don't think it's really possible. And I think it forces us to rethink what is our academic mission. Grants beget grants, not changes in healthcare. And I think if you want to change the healthcare system, you have to think more broadly than grants. And sustaining and improving intervention should not be done one 5-year grant at a time. It's a continuous, evolving, evolutionary process that will get us to be able to think through how do we keep getting better and learn as we go. You then have to be able to disseminate beyond grant sites. My goal in life was not to lower bleeding at 9 centers. My goal in life was to make angioplasty safer and more cost-effective everywhere, and to extend that into neurology and cancer and arthritis and other areas can't write a grant for every single application, every single thing you want. And if the research has values, others will pay for it. If what we're doing really improves the value in healthcare, it has value and people will pay because they want it. And so entrepreneurship, I think, is a very important opportunity and one that our community generally disdains. I mean, I can tell you many of the reviews of our articles were much more critical about my conflict of interest than about the actual study design or analysis or anything like that. It is a cultural problem, and I think that we at the cutting edge of healthcare need to be thinking about other ways and other strategies of how we're going to change things. We started Health Outcome Sciences. It's led to a lot of flack, but I still think it's the right thing to do to create a sustainable thing. And the most exciting thing about this company is Amit, who's in the audience, he led this change at Barnes Jewish Hospital. Barnes was in our grant site, not a huge doctor, they took it down. Amit went there and said, I really believe in this. I think that this kind of high-value, personalized, data-driven, evidence-based way to deliver medicine is what we're supposed to do. Their bleeding rate was between 9 and 10%. They implemented the ePrism solution. There was a lag phase as doctors were getting comfortable with the protocol. Right now, they're down from 10% to 2% of their patients bleed. The volume of patients that they treat at that hospital, every week, 1 to 2 patients does not bleed that used to bleed. When you look at their AKI rates, they similarly drop by absolute difference of 5%. Again, every week, 1 to 2 patients does not have an AKI event. Their inappropriate rate plummeted when they were given upfront the appropriate use criteria. And, to me, more than any article, more than any grant I've gotten, feeling like I've been able to contribute to saving patients from having complications of angioplasty is the most rewarding thing. It is a remarkable achievement. And it's not me, really. I mean, because we implemented it at WashU in our grant, nothing happened. It's me, driving this with his vision, his passion, his sort of doggedness. And it's for all of us to learn from this example that there are barriers to everything we do, and if we keep doggedly sticking to it, we can make an enormous impact. And others are going into it. Victor Zao, when he was at Duke, wrote this article, is now the head of the Institute of Medicine, saying that we need to be fostering innovation in medicine and healthcare, and that in translational research, commercialization is the pathway to human use, and universities, to the extent possible, should facilitate novel industry relationships, enable licensing opportunities, and create startups to support healthcare delivery innovations. Stanford is sort of the mecca of this with their BioX initiative. It is the kind of thing that I think we ought to think about. Not every idea is worth a company. We don't all want to be business people, but this kind of thinking I think is very important. The other option that I have for you, and Bobby Asia's taken over at Beth Israel running their innovation center, is to look to your institution because our work is so aligned with their mission. They need to start investing top-line dollars into outcomes research programs because all companies invest in R&D. You don't see, Apple say, boy, we made a killing this year, we're not going to invest any money in our next iPhone application or iPad or iWatch or whatever. The business of medicine, however, is patient care. And we have got to figure out what we're doing in our own hospital. How are we, what should we be doing? How can we improve? And implementing and actually improving and monitoring that. And yet there's really no investment by most hospitals in this at all. And so at our hospital, I went to St. Luke's administration. And I said, St. Luke's is a community hospital. I mean, I'm at UMKC. I mean, it isn't even ranked in the top 600 medical schools in this country. I mean, let's just be honest, it's not a place just teeming with visionaries and money and all that, but it opens an opportunity to ask and suggest novel ideas. And I said to them, and what we learned in the PRISM implementation about how important a clinical champion was. Because really, I mean, the implementation failed at WashU. We had a good clinical champion. It worked incredibly well. it's my one N of one anecdotal experience. Clinical champions are obviously absolutely critical to everything we do, and we thought, rather than the administration on high going to some conference and learning about the latest new safety initiative and tell all the doctors what they're supposed to do, what we ought to do is invite all the staff, the nurses, the doctors, the pharmacists, to submit ideas, because every day somebody has got to be pissed about 2 or 3 things that go on in the hospital that they know could be done better. And we said to them, give us your idea on 1 page. I mean, it was a really simple form where you would just tell us what's the problem, why is it a big deal, how would you address it, and how would you know if your innovation work, and we would pick 3 to 5, and then our outcomes research team would work with those people who would be the clinical champions and help them develop a very clear, focused, measurable intervention and idea and implement them. And then the hospital would select from those 5, where we wrote a much more detailed proposal, 2 projects to go forward, and then those 2 proponents would get a half day a week to work with our team, with implementation people, with data people, with IT or finance or whoever we need in the hospital to support their vision, and that we would repeat this cycle every 6 months. They really, it was remarkable. They bought off on it. They put a lot of dollars. I mean, and our hospital has had a couple of tough years. They still took millions of dollars to commit to this program so that we could have a 5-year run before they pulled the plug. And in the first application, and Carol knows how frustrated I was about how badly we communicated, there were 53 applications from our health system. And I would say 10 weren't so great. The other 45 were terrific. And getting down to 5 from the top 12 to 15 it's like an NIH study section. Just throw them up and throw a dart with your blindfold on. I mean, it was very hard, but it says that there is an incredible upswelling of interest in doing this, and you with your training have the opportunity to catalyze that interest and to find novel funding streams to be able to support it, because your vision shouldn't be how many R01s I have, it should be what is the impact I made in healthcare. So, it is awkward, actually, to be up here getting a Lifetime Achievement Award when, in fact, when I'm so young, but no, and good for me, but no, reality, I feel a little sheepish, right? Because, this is not an individual, right? I mean, nobody sort of does this alone. And I've been very fortunate to have a remarkable group of colleagues who for years have stuck by my vision. We almost had nobody leave our group in 20 years. I mean, it's been remarkable, and it's because everybody is really committed to this vision, and the success and impact we have is attributable to everybody's hard work and efforts. And so I feel very fortunate to have been surrounded by people. I hope you get to interact with a lot of them. A lot of you have met them in the past. These are some of the folks that have been really inspirational to me. But also, as hard as this journey is, it is a tremendous amount of fun. And you make friends all the time. Now, I have to say, Fred never looked so good. And it's not his come hither look, but it is Fred became a great friend. And so I try and travel out every year for the Chiefs game, and he comes to Kansas City for when the Donkeys come to play us. And it's a great thing. And there are so many friends and so many people, some in this room, some not, people I've been able to have the privilege of mentoring, people that have mentored me. It has been a remarkable opportunity to make sort of friends throughout the country, and frankly, internationally. I mean, these are people I've met all over the world and had the luxury and privilege of visiting and collaborating with, and it's very rewarding. And so this long road, this long path that I'm trying to challenge you to ride down is one that's filled with company and committed and excited and wonderful people to work with. When this was in Baltimore, my family was coming in. They'd never seen me talk, and it would have been really fun to do this. And they couldn't make it down here this time, but I wanted to acknowledge them because they've been a tremendous source of support. And my wife, in particular, has been putting up with all my nonsense, all my frustrations. And believe me, every time Eric objects to one of my papers, my wife hears about it. And yet, the truth is, you need sort of a wonderful balance, and you have to celebrate all of the small and big moments in life, this being a big one. So I'm going to end with sort of this idea about really challenging. So many of us write about disparities in care. Women getting treated worse than men, older versus worse than younger, blacks worse than whites, all that. Don't just describe disparities anymore. Think about how you're going to overcome them. What are you going to do to eradicate them? Because I'm tired of hearing the same old story. I want to hear about how somebody's trying to solve it. Don't describe the care stinks. Describe how you're going to fix it. What are you going to do to elevate the quality and the consistency of care? How many times do you open up a journal and there's another risk model for prognosis? We don't need more risk models. What we need to do is figure out how can those be used to improve treatment. And, I think that articulating deficiencies in doctor-patient communication is easily and readily done. Lord knows it's terrible. But developing strategies to transform these interactions so they're more productive, more patient-centered, that's your responsibility. So let's figure out collectively how we're going to do it and support each other in doing this and carrying forward. So I'll end with Nelson Mandela's quote that there is no passion to be found playing small, in settling for life that is less than one you are capable of living. And I hope that all of you sort of at least, buy what I'm selling, which is that this work, this community has been an incredibly wonderful gift to me. I'm so excited and so happy to be here today, and I'm really humbled and honored that you've recognized me. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you.